Hello and welcome to our program, Where God Weeps, a program where we speak about the situation of the suffering and persecuted church around the world. Sierra Leone is a small country on the west coast of Africa. Known for its natural beauty and long white beaches, it is also one of the poorest nations on earth. The country faces a number of difficult social issues, including abject poverty and high youth unemployment. Many of these problems result from a long and brutal civil war that lasted between 1992 and 2002. But other social issues are the consequence of deeply held traditional beliefs. Sierra Leone has also suffered a series of plagues. The first major plague was a 2016 outbreak of Ebola, a rare and extremely infectious disease that killed nearly 4,000 people. A few years later, in 2019, the COVID pandemic. Despite the government lockdown, many were forced to work, subjecting themselves and their loved ones to the risk of infection in order to feed their families. Here, to talk about some of these issues and to give us a picture of how the Catholic Church is dealing with some of these social concerns, it is my privilege to welcome Father Peter Konteh, the Executive Director of Caritas in Freetown, Sierra Leone. Father Peter, thank you for being with us here today in our program.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you for welcoming me here. It's always a privilege and a blessing to be here. Each time I'm here, I have the feeling of being in a pilgrimage or the sense of the transfiguration. As I represent the people of Sierra Leone and in the context the Church of Sierra Leone, it's a wonderful blessing to be here and to talk to the people of God through you.
Father, I want to address some of the more difficult challenges, and one of the biggest problems that has affected the country has been the recent illnesses that have swept across. You can almost say like biblical plagues. Since 2016, the last was the issue of Ebola. Not many people outside the African context are familiar with what really Ebola looks like when it impacts a person and impacts a family. Can you give us a little bit of insight into what are we talking about when we're talking about Ebola?
Yeah, Sierra Leone as a country, we have encountered a lot of challenging and difficult moments. We had a long period of war. As soon as the war ended, we experienced Ebola. Ebola initially came from Congo area, and it was not in the West Africa. And suddenly we experienced both in Guinea, Liberia and Sierra Leone, we are all border country, and we experienced cases of Ebola. Ebola, many people may not know. I mean, when Ebola started, when we were, explaining, many people didn't realize what was Ebola. When we started explaining the difficulties, the amount of people dying in a mysterious ways, and there were a lot of myths around Ebola, and so it was difficult for people to understand. Locally, people felt it was a witchcraft flight that has crashed, and so it was difficult for them to get medical attention. And our doctors ourselves were not au fait with how Ebola could be prevented and the infectious way it was. So we lost most of our doctors in during the period of Ebola.
How would you describe the illness itself? Just what did you say when you were talking about the human face of Ebola? How does it impact the person?
When you have Ebola and you are in your household, there's possibility of infecting everybody. And that's why that brought the women and the women particularly in a very vulnerable situation, because a mother cannot see the husband with a fever and does not touch, cannot see your child with a fever. So many people lost their entire family because of that.
It's
just a simple touch.
Is
a simple touch. It's not like putting on face.
No.
A simple touch, Ebola is transmitted. An entire family will
What
wiped
happens
out.
to the person itself?
The person will develop severe fever, and then it shrinks you up to death, and you are weakened, and
it's organ failure.
It's organ failure eventually.
Wow.
Terrible disease.
And
Terrible.
it's horrific also to look at.
It's horrific to look at the victim dying. I mean, we had to develop a lot of strategies in which we will now worship or carry out things, because touch was the problem. And you know, our liturgy, especially the African liturgy, it involves a lot of touching, shaking hands, dancing, and clapping. And so we find ourselves as a church developing new mode of kind of worship. For example, it happened that it was Holy Week, and so we called the bishop, what do we do now? Washing of the feet, you know, baptism. How do you anoint? It's church, you don't know who has. And so we had to do the cotton ball to put the oil. So there were a lot of mechanisms that we had to put in place to cope and continue our function as priest and give hope to the people, which is the biggest thing that we represent, is giving hope to our suffering people.
You mentioned also the medicinal, the doctors who were also very badly affected. I think it wiped out a great part of the doctors in Sierra Leone, the medical staff, because of because of this transmission.
Exactly, and I mean, our best, we have few medical personnel, doctors, specialists, very few, and Ebola took like 70% of them, you know, because they themselves, I remember a particular instance, they brought in a sick person, and the doctor was not fully prepared with the prevention thing, and the person was dropping, and the doctor tried to grab the person, and the person vomited on the doctor. Immediately he himself got infected. You know, so it was really at risk. It was really risky, and we lost our best doctors.
How did the international community respond? You went to the US, you went to the Senate, you went to the United Kingdom, you went to the Parliament. How did the people respond when you came carrying this message of this new illness, which seemed to be so horrific and yet unique to Africa?
Unfortunately, when it was just on our side, it was difficult to get attention. And the US got involved when the first American doctor who was working in Liberia got infected. So we did our presentation with that doctor who was given the medical side of Ebola, whilst we were given the human face of Ebola. So the attention was not like significant, or people felt first it's far away, Ebola, until they realized that people could travel. And that it was at that time the CDC in the United States, you know, took attention to it, because now there are American doctors, missionaries who went there, and they were bringing them home. So how will that be handled? It was that we were invited to give a presentation with this first doctor who survived Ebola, and then we ourselves gave a presentation on how it is affecting livelihood, it is affecting families, and we had people who have lost entire families. We take care of a lot of orphans now who, as a result, they lost entire family. So we are bringing them up to let them experience love, because they don't have like an uncle and auntie. The entire family was wiped out. It was a terrible disease. So eventually, when we got the attention to the international body, mainly US and the UK, then we started getting support and attention. And United States made a big contribution. The UK also did. And gradually, we saw light at the end of the tunnel.
3 years after the Ebola crisis in 2016, there was, in 2019, the COVID crisis that came. And again, Sierra Leone, like many other African countries, were affected. How did you see the impact of COVID-19 on the population in Sierra Leone? And was it as, let's say, was it as bad as what we had experienced here in Europe? For, you know, it really seemed as if everything was locked down in the first months of March of 2019, 2020. So what was it like for you in Sierra Leone?
When COVID came, the prediction was that Africa people will die and they will be languishing, because first of all, we don't have the specialized health capability to handle COVID. But what we do had, which we got from Ebola, was how do we do social distance? How do we do tracing? That we had experience already from Ebola. How do you do contact tracing? So that, in a sense, gave us the preparation so that COVID is not as widespread as it was predicted. I mean, I will not say it is, maybe it's divine providence that help us to survive, because we don't have the specialized, the whole of our city only had 3 ventilators. And so we were wondering, when we are hit by this, what will happen? There were no masks, there were no sanitizers available. So possibly our experience in Ebola helped us to, but secondly, I think it's God realizing that we have suffered so much and we don't deserve. There are a lot of theories about the sunshine, but then you say, okay, there are other countries who have sunshine and they are dying. India is as hot as, so you never put a theory. So the whole of the crisis, we don't have over 200 deaths.
I wanted to come to this point because Ebola had a 50 to 90% mortality rate. Whereas COVID, like something a little bit over 3%.
3%,
right?
Yeah.
And probably less, again, in Africa. This is worldwide.
Yeah.
And yet the world leapt and started throwing money. Did you find that a bit frustrating?
Yes, I did, because the attention and the amount of resources that went to COVID, which I would not say slightly exaggerated, because, we've had flu, and flu does not kill any of us. But out in the West, flu was already an issue that kills a lot of people. So our resistance to survive flu and all other kind of lungs disease also helped. But it was amazing that I said, a life is a life. It doesn't mean if you are in Africa or you're in the West, your one life is precious than the other. The attention and the money that was given in COVID was not the same. Even in the terms of the response we got from the West to help us with COVID was not the same response we got from Ebola at all. And we lost a lot of life, and it was deadly, And you wouldn't say Ebola is totally gone, because quite recently in the Congo again, it surfaced. So we are saying the resources that was put to investigate, to research, to produce vaccines, can you do that for Ebola? Because it will resurface again.
Yes, of course.
So it's not the same proportion of resources that went into to COVID that went into Ebola that killed a lot of our people.
How was it for you to distribute the sacraments? Have you seen the faith decline, or have you seen it grow?
For the many challenges, situations that we face, war, Ebola, COVID, people have turned to God. People have believed in the institution, in the prayers. So prayer has played key in the way people cope in our own calamities. So instead, our churches after Ebola got full. A lot of people pay attention that if I was safe at all during this pandemic or during this crisis, it's because of God. So in fact, it strengthened the faith of the people. And one thing that it was extraordinary is that what lessons we learned in COVID is that it brought us closer to our people, because there was no public masses, so we went to house masses. So we now know how our people live. So it brought some kind of a proximity. So I realized that, I never realized how this person was living, how their house was, who their families. So because there was nothing going. So we had the opportunities as pastors, as priests, to go around, to talk to people, so that they don't develop depression, because the economy suffers a lot. We depend a lot on remittance from the West. And most Sierra Leoneans are outside in the States and in the UK, and majority of people only survive on what they will send for them. Well, now the people in the West were also having an economic decline. Remittance became very slow. And so our economy, even though we didn't suffer a lot of death and casualty, but the economy in our place suffered a lot in COVID, more than how it did even in the period of Ebola.
And also because of the hunger, I think.
Because of the hunger.
There was a famine that occurred.
There was a famine, there was a lack of production, because COVID had its own restrictions. And so people stayed, and the production was very limited. And so people were starving. A lot of people in need of food, and we got a lot of people who were asking for alms, begging in the street, because that was the only way they could cope. The hospitality industry went to zero, so our economy that depend on tourists and visitors to boom it, and the remittance all got slowed down.
Somebody said poor people have now become destitute as a result. Have you seen this also in Sierra Leone, the explosion of poverty?
Many people are poor because the economy is not great, but now the ones that are really, really poor, who have no option, have increased.
Which has, of course, consequences. Children are then taken out of school because the parents need them to work. They go to the mines.
They're exploited in many ways.
They're exploited.
So it's really painful and sad at the level in which poverty was that a parent could ask the child, young girl, go and sleep with a man, earn money for us in the morning so that we could eat for the day. Very sad and very painful.
How do you work in this context? What can you do?
Our faith has been the inspiration, because without that we would have been broken. Sometimes I think we ourselves as pastors and priests need a lot of healing, because every day is a new day. The story becomes challenging and worst, and you see horrific things, people dying, it needs a lot of strength, and we have gone through a lot of those kind of things that if it was without our faith, we would have been broken. So we have devised strategies to cope in those moments of difficulties, and so prayer has been a key to us. And that is why I appreciate you guys here, because we realize that apart from the material resources that we receive for project, you are one of the organizations that support us with prayers, universal prayers. And that gives you a lot of joy when you know that I'm not alone. When I'm doing something, I have a group around the world that supports me, not only financially. Financial support is good, but what I value in you is the prayers that we receive, the assurance that we have a bigger family than we think praying for us. And so even when we walk in a valley of tear of death, we do not, we are sure that we have our family behind you praying for us.
And that we do.
Yeah.
And also the viewers now watching will be praying with you, Father.
Yeah.
I want to change the chapter a little bit and talk about some of the, let's say, more historic, traditional challenges that you also face in Sierra Leone, and that is, for example, an issue that you have been involved in, and that is female genital mutilation, or FGM, as they say. This issue is very prevalent in Sierra Leone, and my question to you is, why is it so prevalent? Why is this issue such a problem in Sierra Leone? And then secondly, what is the church trying to do and trying to, in order to alleviate this problem?
Yeah, Sierra Leone has the highest percentage of FGM, because before the advent of school, there was this traditional society that will play the role of educating young girls as how they will behave when they get married. So it was like a school. You are taught how to behave with your husband and so on. So that was the essence of this society. So many parents will send their daughters there so that they are educated how to deal with their domestic issues. Now how to cook, how to talk to the husband, but then the ceremony will conclude with the FGM.
This society is called the Bondo Society.
Bondo Society.
Can you explain just a little bit for our understanding what is the Bondo Society? Because it's predominantly a female society.
Predominantly a female society, and when we were growing up, you were given a taboo not to even talk about it or not to even mention about it, because it was strictly female society, and there were all sorts of myths, that if you talk about it, you will get a swollen stomach and so on. But basically, the Bondo Society, as I said, started as a collection of transmitting tradition and culture to the younger girls that were coming up. And then to qualify, like the graduation stage, they will get you into the FGM. For many reasons. One of the arguments they use is that if they don't remove that part, then you become promiscuous. So if you are going to your husband, they need to cut your sexual pleasure a little bit so that you are steady in your marital home. So that was the belief. But now we've proven that we want to sensitize. We've proven that Sierra Leone also have the high infant mortality rate, and this is because of FGM. This is one of the reasons why children will die when they are, women will die when they are giving birth to children, because you are not complete. Something has been removed, you know. So we are now taking it as a human rights issue, and we are now taking it as a church to advocate that this is not a correct practice, because you put it in paradox to the amount of lives that are lost doing childbearing birth, and also the amount of lives that they lose when they are doing the cutting. Sometimes the thing is not sterilized, sometimes, so people lose their lives. So we are taking it from the perspective of saving life, just as we do for abortion and other related issues, that no, we are for life. Don't do anything that will destroy life. So this is the dimension or the entrance of the church in advocating no to FGM.
Father, in 2019 and again in 2022, you were nominated as one of the 100 most influential people in Sierra Leone. How do you see this? Because your mission has become a very public one. You've spoken around the world, you've been giving conferences on these topics. How do you balance this with your vocation as a priest?
Well, first, all these awards we receive with humility, and we give glory to God. And so when those awards are given to me as a person, I rededicate it, first of all, to the church, understanding that there's a danger that sometimes you think it's me. It's not you, you are representing. Your bishop gave you the appointment to represent you in the tax. So I don't try to lose sight of that I'm representing an institution. So if I get any reward, it belongs not to me, but to the institution, and of course to God. And so these are recognition that it's like applause to do more, not to develop pride, not to, but to humble you, to carry out your service. Our calling as priests is a call of service. And therefore, this recognition of service is for you to do more, to you to realize that I'm the servant of others. It's not about me, but it's about our doors being open to be available for service. And also, those awards are also dedicated to our beneficiaries, those that we serve. Without them, you cannot serve. So it's always for me like a privilege when we go to the slum area. I tell them, we owe you thank, because you give us opportunity to exercise our key ministry. At the end of the day, Jesus is not going to ask us, how much award did you get? When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. In prison, you visited me. These will be the key answers. And so for you to give me the opportunity to answer to that question, I say bravo to the beneficiaries.
Father, what can we do? We've spoken broadly about the situation of the illnesses and plagues that have affected Sierra Leone, the challenges of the culture, and the work that the church is trying to do within this context. How can we help?
I want to first of all extend my gratitude to many of you listening, to those who are supporting, those who are giving their little. What you think it's little is great for us. So it's transforming life. It gives us resolve to continue to evangelize. And so we continue to seek your support so that we continue our work of evangelization. First, my request will be a continuation of your prayers for us. It's extraordinary, and it's the greatest gift you could give. the Christian impact is very high. You will notice that. So those structures that are instruments of evangelization, we need support for them. The house of formation, the churches, the parish houses, those are instruments for us to evangelize. Sometimes mobility, to reach out. We live in a situation where we face also a danger of upcoming churches of prosperity, that I call them. They tell you, pray, I will pray for you, become a rich man. I will pray for you, get a visa for the United States and so on. Our people are drifting to those kind of things. So we say our God that we serve is not a God that prides in wealth. It's a God that lifted the poor. It's a God, our Savior was born in a stable. He could have been born in a palace, but he wanted to send message. The essence of my mission is to save and give hope to everyone. Not excluding, like in the SDGs, leave no one behind. So we want to build structures that will leave no one behind and let them also understand that God created us out of love. He's a God of the Trinity, love of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and therefore it is that love that we carry out in our work, regardless of our faith. When we carry out our work of love, we don't ask, are you a Christian or a Muslim? We just act and show that, say that we know we are Christians by our love. So we want to appeal to continuous support to give us those structures that will enable us to carry out the act of love.
Father Peter, thank you for having been with us today in our program.
Thank you very much. Wonderful to be here.
And for me as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us today in our program, Where God Weeps. And if you'd like to know more about the situation of Sierra Leone and the church there, the work of Father Peter, please have a look at the contact information at the end of this program. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.